Hi, I'm Mostdog, and welcome to my first devlog for FlipStream. I just started programming my new game, and I've already had a lot of fun trying to figure out how to make an infinite runner and how to deal with some of the unique challenges of my game. And I'd like to show off some of the stuff I've already figured out and make some predictions on what I think will be some of the biggest challenges with this game. I always like to start my games out with a game design document. Having design requirements helps me keep my priorities straight so I'm not wasting time on minute details early on or pre-optimizing for systems that don't exist yet. I'm sure I'll end up referring back to this document frequently throughout the process of making this game, and I'm sure I'll add to the list as I go. This game design doc was helpful for me because it made me think through all of the mechanics in detail so I could work out some questions like how frequently should the player be allowed to flip gravity, and what happens if the player presses the jump or flip button while sliding. It was also an opportunity for me to create a music, art, and sound effects checklist. That can be a bit daunting at first, but it usually helps me make the project feel more manageable in the future because I've already divided it into bite-sized pieces, so things like artwork aren't huge monoliths. So the first thing I wanted to figure out in this game was the basic player movement, and obviously I don't have any artwork yet, so I've been using placeholder textures and the built-in Godot logo asset. Keep in mind I'm trying to go into this pretty blind. I'm obviously using Google to help me solve problems, but I also want to figure out the core components of this game without too much help. So my original idea for the movement was to have the player stay locked in the same X position and have the repeating background scroll past the player, but I ran into an issue with obstacle generation because I'm using a parallax layer for the repeating background, and that meant that any obstacle I generated would repeat indefinitely with the rest of the background. So I eventually changed that so the player would move through the repeating background, and I locked the camera's position to the player. And that seemed to work much better. And luckily it wasn't too much refactoring, just moving a few nodes around, which is easy enough in Godot. Once I had the basic movement working, I started on the jump, slide, and gravity flip mechanics. And that was the fun part. I've made this as tunable as I can because I don't know exactly what this will all feel like once I have real obstacles and artwork. The jump mechanic was simple enough, I just had to make sure to account for the direction of gravity. The slide mechanic was interesting, and I've definitely had to make some placeholder functionality because I don't have a character sprite with a slide animation yet. So I created two separate player sprites, one full size and one in slide mode, and same with the hitboxes. So when the player slides, his hitbox shrinks, and the player appears to shrink too. I also made it so the player can jump or flip out of a slide to cancel out the slide. The flip mechanic was the most interesting. Basically all it does is flip gravity, which is simple enough, but there are some rules. One of which is that the player can't flip gravity over and over again while flying through the air. However, I want the player to be allowed to jump and then flip. He just can't flip multiple times in a row without landing first. And the challenge is that after the player flips, there's a split second where the player is still on the ground. So that would make it difficult to tell when the player had just barely flipped gravity while running. So I put together a kind of hacky solution with a buffer timer so that there's a slight delay after the player flips gravity where he's unable to flip again. I'm going to try to make that cleaner in the future, but for now this works. So at this point I've got the movement basically done, which is pretty solid for how early on I am in the game's development. But there was one other thing I also wanted to figure out in this devlog, and that's the difficulty scaling. I learned about this really cool built-in resource in Godot that makes difficulty scaling, well, not difficult. It's called a curve. It allows you to create a graph with as many points as you want and shape the graph however you want. In this case, I made a simple curve that converges at a certain point pretty far in the distance. And once you have this graph created, you can use the sample function to grab a point on the line based on the provided x coordinate. So I was able to use the curve resource to constantly update the player's speed over time according to the graph. My original idea was to update the player's speed multiplier over time based on some math equation, but this was way more simple, smooth, and reliable, and it was built right into Godot, so it did all the heavy lifting for me. So that's going to be about it for now. So far this has been super fun, and I'm feeling optimistic, but I think my next few devlogs are going to be full of a lot more head scratching and rage quitting. My next programming challenge I need to tackle is obstacle generation, and that's going to be a doozy. And after that, I'm going to need to start working on artwork, and let me tell you, I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to artwork. I can draw basic shapes and textures, but I'm worried about drawing and animating the player, so we'll see if I'm still feeling excited and optimistic in a few weeks. Thanks for following along, and let me know if you enjoy this highlight commentary style of devlog, or if you'd prefer more raw, in-the-moment clips of me working on the game's code and solving problems. Let me know and I might change the format in the future, and I'll see you in the next one.